In the quiet town of Willowbrook, nestled in the heart of an enchanting valley surrounded by rolling hills and dense, ancient forests, stood a humble home that had witnessed generations of laughter, tears, and memories. The house was old, its bricks weathered by time, and its windows framed with ivy that had crept slowly over the years. At the end of Maple Lane, the house stood, holding the history of the Whitlock family within its walls. Evelyn Whitlock, the matriarch of the family, had spent most of her 85 years in this home, a place that had once echoed with the voices of her children. She had 3 children. Gregory, the oldest, a driven businessman who had moved far away to the bustling city. Clara, the middle child, an artist whose heart beat for the coastlines and sunsets. And Michael, the youngest, a lawyer who had settled in a nearby town but rarely visited. Evelyn had seen her children grow up, leave, and make lives of their own. At first, there were phone calls, visits, and promises to keep in touch. But over time, those visits became fewer, the phone calls more infrequent. Their lives had become consumed with careers, relationships, and the demands of adulthood. Yet, Evelyn always held on to hope that things would return to how they once were, full of joy, laughter, and togetherness. This year was special. Evelyn was turning 85, and she felt it deeply. The years had taken their toll on her, and the weariness of time had crept into her bones. But despite her frailty, Evelyn had planned a celebration, a small, intimate birthday dinner for her children. She imagined the warmth of their presence filling the house, the sound of glasses clinking, and the shared stories of years gone by. It was a wish she had nurtured in her heart for months. She sent out invitations, each one carefully addressed, and called her children personally, reminding them of the date. "Don't forget, my dears," she'd said gently, her voice filled with a hope that only a mother could possess. "It's been far too long since we've been together. Please, I would love to see you." Gregory, Clara, and Michael all assured her that they would be there. They sounded sincere, promising to make time for their mother. It brought a smile to Evelyn's face as she hung up the phone. She envisioned the evening so clearly. A table set with her finest china, a cake decorated with delicate frosting, the candles flickering, waiting for her children to arrive. It would be a night to remember, a night to rekindle the bonds that had faded with the passage of time. The day arrived, and Evelyn began preparing early in the morning. She spent hours in the kitchen, making her children's favorite dishes, carefully arranging everything with precision. She even wore a floral dress she hadn't worn in years, one she had kept in her closet as a reminder of happier days. The house smelled of roast chicken, fresh herbs, and sweet pastries. The table was set, the cake stood proudly in the center, its candles unlit, waiting for the moment when her children would walk through the door. But as the hours passed, the house grew silent. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythmic sound growing louder in the empty room. Evelyn stood at the window, her heart beating faster as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon. The sky outside turned shades of pink and purple, casting long shadows across the house. She checked her phone repeatedly, hoping to see a message or a missed call. Nothing. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. She stood by the table, glancing at the empty chairs where her children were meant to sit. Her heart sank as she realized that they weren't coming. The first pang of disappointment hit her like a physical blow, but she tried to reason with herself. Perhaps there had been a delay. Maybe they were stuck in traffic or had encountered some other complication. But as the evening wore on, that explanation grew thinner and thinner. The house was still. The food grew cold, the candles on the cake remained unlit, and the silence grew unbearable. No phone calls, no messages, no knocks at the door. Evelyn felt the weight of her loneliness more deeply than ever before. She stood in the center of the room, her shoulders slumping as a tear escaped her eye. There would be no celebration tonight, no reunion with her children. She had waited, hoped, and believed in the promise of their return. But now it felt as though that promise had been broken. Evelyn walked slowly to the cake, the soft glow of the candles reflecting in her tired eyes. With a heavy heart, she blew them out herself, her whispered wish not for herself but for her children. She wished for their happiness, for their well-being wherever they were. She knew deep down that they were living their lives, consumed by their own pursuits, and she had become nothing more than a distant memory. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. Her mind raced, but she couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. It wasn't just the birthday. It was the years of waiting, the endless hope that one day they would all come back together again. But that day never came. The following weeks passed in a blur of quiet monotony. Evelyn's routine became simpler. She would walk to the park each day, sit on a bench, and watch the world go by. The neighbors would wave to her, and occasionally, someone would stop to chat, but those interactions were brief, hollow even. Evelyn never let on how deeply she felt the absence of her children. She had always been a proud woman, fiercely independent. To admit how alone she felt would be too painful. Meanwhile, her children were living their lives, unaware of the growing emptiness in their mother's heart. Gregory was consumed with his work in the city, traveling for business deals, chasing success and prestige. Clara, lost in the world of art, was preparing for an upcoming exhibition, her focus entirely on her next masterpiece. Michael, the youngest, had recently taken on a major legal case, and the pressures of the courtroom left little room for anything else. To them, their mother was just a distant call away. They would visit her when they could, but it was always tomorrow, never today. And so, the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The distance between them grew. Evelyn had come to terms with her solitude, or so she thought. But one chilly evening, as she sat by the window, something shifted within her. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, one that she couldn't explain. She lay down to rest, thinking that a nap would ease her weariness. But as she closed her eyes, she knew deep down that her time was coming to an end. The next morning, Evelyn was found by her neighbor, who had noticed the pile of newspapers accumulating on her porch. She was gone, quietly slipping away in the night. The news of her death was met with shock and guilt by her children. Gregory, Clara, and Michael had all received the call, and it hit each of them hard. They hadn't been there for her. Not on her birthday, not in her final moments. Now, it was too late. Their mother was gone, and they were left to deal with the consequences of their neglect. They returned to the house, the place where they had all grown up, now empty of their mother's presence. The funeral was small, attended by a handful of neighbors and distant relatives. But it was the reading of Evelyn's will that left a lasting impact. As the lawyer, Mr. Hargrave, began to read the document, the siblings sat together, their hearts heavy with remorse. They had come to expect the usual: division of possessions, family heirlooms, and charitable donations. But what came next was a surprise. A lesson, one that Evelyn had carefully crafted for them in her final days. Her words, written in beautiful flowing script, would become their final gift, one that none of them could have ever anticipated. The will was read in the dimly lit parlor of the old Whitlock house, the air thick with unspoken regret. The three siblings sat together, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their mother's absence pressing down on them. Mr. Hargrave, the family lawyer, sat behind a heavy oak desk, a man who had known Evelyn for many years. His glasses perched low on his nose, he carefully turned the pages of the will, each one bringing them closer to an unexpected revelation. "To my dear children," Mr. Hargrave began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet reverence. "I have left something special, something that I believe will be of great value to you, though not in the way that you might expect." The siblings exchanged confused glances, their hearts fluttering with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What could their mother have left them that was not a material possession? None of them had truly expected anything more than the inheritance of the house or perhaps some family heirlooms. The idea that Evelyn had left them something more profound, something intangible, was beyond their comprehension. Please know, Mr. Hargrave continued, that this inheritance is not one of wealth. It is not gold, nor jewels, nor property. What I have left for you is a gift of knowledge, of memory, and of lessons that only time could impart. It is my hope that when the time comes, you will understand what I have tried to teach you through my life, through my words. The siblings sat in stunned silence, their minds racing. Was this some kind of trick? Had their mother written something cryptic in an attempt to get them to reflect on their neglect? Or perhaps this was simply the ramblings of an elderly woman, speaking in riddles before her passing. Still, they could not shake the nagging feeling that Evelyn, in her final days, had wanted to teach them something that went beyond material wealth. You will find this gift, Mr. Hargrave continued, his voice gaining a gentle strength, in the attic of this house. In a locked chest, you will uncover the truth of my inheritance. There you will find the letters I have written for each of you, letters I have kept hidden for many years. They are addressed to you, each one a reflection of my love, my hopes, and my wishes for your futures. It is my final lesson to you, my children. The room fell silent once more, and the only sound was the soft creaking of the house as the wind passed through its walls. The siblings sat in shock, unable to fully grasp the meaning of their mother's words. The inheritance wasn't a tangible object. It wasn't something they could sell or divide. It was something far more profound, a collection of personal letters, each one written with the care and tenderness of a mother who had waited for her children to return, even when they had long since moved on with their own lives. Evelyn's children exchanged hesitant glances before rising from their seats. There was no immediate rush to find the chest. No one spoke, and no one moved quickly. Instead, the air was thick with a sense of uncertainty, a deep feeling that they had missed something precious, something that could never be replaced. Gregory, the eldest, was the first to break the silence. He had always been the most pragmatic of the three, a man whose life had been consumed by business and ambition. His brow furrowed as he spoke, the guilt in his voice barely concealed. "I don't understand," he murmured. "Why didn't she just tell us? Why leave this hidden away like some mystery?" Clara, the artist, was next. She had always been more in touch with her emotions, yet even she struggled to understand her mother's intentions. Maybe it wasn't something she could say in person. Maybe she wanted us to find it on our own, she replied softly. Maybe she wanted us to learn something from it. Michael, the youngest, spoke last, his voice tinged with frustration. "We could have been there for her. We should have been there. All of us." His voice cracked with the weight of unspoken regrets, and he paused, fighting the surge of emotions that threatened to overtake him. "We'll find it," Gregory said, his voice more resolute now. "We need to know what she meant. If this is important, then we owe it to her to understand." With heavy hearts, the three siblings made their way to the attic, the space where they had spent much of their childhood. It had always been a place of mystery, filled with forgotten treasures from the past. Dusty old furniture, family photographs in cracked frames, and boxes of keepsakes their parents had collected over the years. But now, as they ascended the narrow staircase to the attic, it felt like a place filled with lost time, each step echoing the distance between them and the woman who had loved them unconditionally. The attic was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and paper. A faint light filtered in through a small window near the eaves, casting long shadows across the floor. The room was cluttered with boxes and old furniture, but in the far corner, just as Mr. Hargrave had described, was a large wooden chest. It was covered in dust, its brass lock tarnished with age, and it sat untouched for years. Clara, her hands trembling, stepped forward and found the key hidden within an envelope on top of the chest. It was sealed with a wax stamp, her mother's initials scrawled across it in elegant handwriting. Clara held the key in her hands for a moment, her heart racing with anticipation. With a deep breath, she slid the key into the lock and turned it. The chest creaked open, revealing dozens of letters stacked neatly inside, each one addressed to a different child. The letters were tied together with faded ribbons, the edges of the paper yellowed with age. Clara's fingers brushed over the first letter, her name written in her mother's delicate script. It was surreal, this connection to her mother that had been severed for so long. She could almost feel Evelyn's presence in the room with them. One by one, the siblings took their letters, each finding their own personal message from Evelyn. Gregory unfolded his letter first, his face unreadable as he scanned the words. His mother's message was filled with love, yes, but it was also tinged with a deep sadness, one that he had not expected. She had always been proud of his achievements, but she had longed for something more, something beyond the hustle of business, beyond the endless chase for success. My dearest Gregory, the letter read, I have always been proud of your accomplishments, but I fear you have lost sight of what truly matters. You've built empires, you've conquered boardrooms, but in doing so, you have left behind the very things that bring true happiness, love, peace, and the joy of small, quiet moments. You've been too busy for yourself, too busy for the world around you. I pray that one day you will stop and listen to your heart, and remember that time is the one thing you can never buy back. Gregory's eyes blurred with tears as he read the final words. He had always believed that his success would bring him fulfillment, but he had never truly considered the toll it had taken on his relationships, his family, and his own happiness. Clara's letter was filled with words of praise for her art, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of sorrow. Evelyn had always supported her daughter's dreams, but it was clear that she longed for more than just the paintings and exhibitions that had consumed Clara's life. My sweet Clara, the letter read, your paintings are beautiful, and your soul is reflected in every brushstroke. But I miss the days when you were home, when you would laugh and tell me about your dreams. I miss the little moments we shared. Please, my dear, don't forget the people who love you. Art is a wonderful pursuit, but family is where your heart truly belongs. Michael's letter was the most difficult to read. His mother had always been supportive, but her words now carried a sense of quiet resignation. She had always known that he was caught up in the demands of his career, but she had hoped he would find balance. My beloved Michael, the letter began, I know how hard you work, how much you care about justice. But I fear you have become so entangled in the courtroom that you have lost sight of the beauty that surrounds you. Life is short, my son. Don't let the rush of life pass you by. There are more important things than winning cases. There is love. There is kindness. There is time spent with those you care about. Each of them sat in silence, the letters in their hands, the weight of their mother's words sinking in. Evelyn had left them something far more valuable than material wealth. She had left them the lessons she had learned over the years, the wisdom she had accumulated from a life well lived. And as they read her words, they realized that this inheritance, this gift, was something they could never replace. It was a gift of love, a gift of time, a gift of family. And it was up to them to learn from it. The attic, once a place of forgotten memories, now felt like the heart of a revelation, where the past met the present with an undeniable force. As the siblings sat among the dust-covered relics of their childhood, the weight of their mother's words hung in the air, heavy with the gravity of what they had missed. Evelyn had given them something they could never buy, the chance to finally understand what had always mattered to her, what she had longed for them to realize, and what they had neglected for so many years. Each of them sat still for a long while, the letters clutched in their hands, the room shrouded in silence, except for the occasional creak of the old house. There was so much to process, so much that Evelyn had left behind, not in the form of a fortune or prized possessions, but in a treasure trove of wisdom that had been carefully packaged in ink and paper. They had come here expecting a simple division of assets, perhaps a few final formalities. But what they had uncovered was a deep and meaningful legacy, one that made them realize the extent to which they had allowed their lives to slip away from the things that truly mattered. Gregory, the first to break the silence, set his letter down on his lap, his fingers tracing the edges of the paper, as if still trying to absorb the weight of it all. His face, usually so composed and controlled, now carried the heavy burden of realization. The words his mother had written had pierced something deep within him, a place he had long ignored, buried beneath the walls of his corporate empire. He had spent years building his career, pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion, all in pursuit of success. But Evelyn's letter made him see that in his quest for financial wealth, he had neglected the wealth that truly mattered. Time with his family, the quiet moments shared with loved ones, the bonds that could never be measured in dollars or stock options. Gregory leaned back against the dusty wooden wall of the attic, his mind racing with memories of childhood. He remembered the days when he used to come home from school, exhausted but eager to spend time with his mother. She would always have a warm meal ready, and she would sit with him while he talked about his day. Those moments, those small, fleeting moments, had meant more to her than anything he had achieved in his years as a businessman. She was right, he muttered softly, more to himself than to anyone else. I've become a stranger to my own joy. Clara, the artist, sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers gently unfolding her mother's letter as she too reflected on the years that had passed. She had always prided herself on her ability to capture the beauty of the world in her art, but her mother's words made her see something else. Evelyn had never begrudged Clara's artistic pursuits, but her words now carried a tenderness and a longing that Clara had never fully understood. She had thought that her mother was content with her choices, with the life she had built on the canvas of her dreams. But Evelyn's letter painted a picture of quiet loneliness, of a mother yearning for the presence of her daughter, not just her artwork. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read the final lines of the letter. I miss you, Evelyn had written. I miss your laughter, the sound of your voice, and the way you used to tell me about your day. Art is beautiful, but love is what gives it meaning. Please, my dear, remember the ones who care for you. Your art will always be there, but we may not be. Clara clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed with emotion. She had spent so much time chasing the horizon, capturing fleeting sunsets and distant landscapes, but she had never stopped to consider that perhaps the most beautiful thing in her life had been the simple presence of her family. Her mother had never asked for grand gestures, only the kind of moments that could be shared over tea, on quiet afternoons, or during the warm embrace of a holiday. It was as if, in her pursuit of art, Clara had forgotten the art of simply being present with those who mattered most. She turned to her brother Michael, whose face was still hidden behind the letter, his brow furrowed in thought. Michael, the youngest, had always been the one who tried to fix things, to take action, to solve problems. But as he read the words his mother had left for him, he found that this was not a problem to be solved. There were no legal precedents or courtroom strategies that could fix the ache in his heart. He could only read, reflect, and learn. His letter had a different tone than Gregory's and Clara's. It was filled with quiet encouragement, but also with the quiet resignation of a mother who had seen the toll that his work had taken on him. Michael had always prided himself on his career, his ambition to fight for justice, to protect the innocent, to make a difference in the world. But in his pursuit of his career, he had pushed aside the people who needed him the most, his mother, his siblings, and even himself. My dear Michael, his mother's letter began. I have always admired your dedication to your work. You fight for the truth, for what is right. But I worry that in your quest for justice, you have lost sight of the greater truth. Life is not only about victories and losses in the courtroom. There is a time for work, and there is a time for love. Don't let the pressures of life blind you to the love that surrounds you. Time, once gone, can never be regained. Michael's hands trembled as he folded the letter back up. He had spent so many years wrapped up in his ambition, focused solely on achieving the next big victory, that he had ignored the victories that mattered more, the quiet moments spent with family, the laughter that echoed through the walls of his childhood home, the simple love his mother had offered without hesitation. Michael stood up, his knees weak as he walked over to the window, looking out at the town below. The hills were bathed in the soft light of dusk, the golden glow of the setting sun casting a peaceful hush over the town. It reminded him of the beauty of those small moments, the ones he had forgotten, while chasing after something far less meaningful. For a long time, the siblings remained in the attic, each lost in their thoughts, their mother's words swirling in their minds like the dust motes that danced in the sunlight. The chest of letters had unlocked something far greater than the inheritance they had expected. It had opened their eyes to the realization that the most valuable inheritance their mother could have given them was not something they could hold in their hands. It was the gift of reflection, the chance to learn from the past, to reconnect with the things that truly mattered, and to make amends for the time they had lost. Clara stood up and walked over to the chest. She picked up the remaining letters, each one a snapshot of Evelyn's heart, a lifetime of wisdom condensed into fragile paper. She handed a letter to Michael and then to Gregory. They stood together, silently, united by the bond they had once shared and the one they had almost lost. It was a bond that could never be broken, no matter how much time had passed or how much distance had come between them. For the first time in years, the three of them shared something far more important than wealth or inheritance. They shared understanding, and in that understanding, they found the healing they so desperately needed. "Let's go home," Gregory said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "Yes," Clara agreed softly, "let's go home." And so, as the night descended upon Willowbrook, the Whitlock family began the long journey of rediscovery, a journey that would take them not to distant places, but into the quiet, familiar corners of their own hearts. They had learned the most profound lesson of all. Love, not success, not wealth, was the legacy their mother had left them. And it was that love, now rekindled, that would guide them forward, not just in memory, but in life. The weeks that followed Evelyn Whitlock's passing were marked by a quiet transformation. Gregory, Clara, and Michael, once scattered by the demands of their own lives, began to come together in ways they had not experienced in years. They found themselves revisiting the old house more often than they had in the past, not because of the property or its value, but because of something far more precious: the memories that lingered in the walls and the lessons they had inherited from their mother's words. The house on Maple Lane, which had once seemed so full of echoes and loneliness, now felt like a place where healing could begin. At first, it had been difficult. The silence of the rooms weighed heavily on them, each corner filled with reminders of their past neglect. But slowly they started to fill the space with conversation. The walls, once silent witnesses to years of absence, now became the backdrop to the slow, steady rebuilding of relationships. Gregory was the first to make a change. In the weeks after reading the letters, he took a long, hard look at the life he had built. It had always been about the next deal, the next big merger, the next opportunity to climb higher on the corporate ladder. But the words his mother had written to him stayed with him, nagging at the edges of his mind. "Success isn't everything," she had written. "I wanted to see you happy." He found himself thinking more and more about what true happiness might look like. Gregory, who had always been a workaholic, started to make a conscious effort to change his approach to life. He reduced his travel, took time off from his demanding job, and began to spend more time with his family. It wasn't easy at first. He found himself at a loss for things to do that didn't involve his work, but as he spent more time in the company of his siblings, something unexpected happened. He began to reconnect with parts of himself that he had long neglected. He took walks with Michael, something they hadn't done since their teenage years, and in those walks, they talked about things that had nothing to do with business or the courtroom. They shared stories about their childhood, laughed about old memories, and started to build a bond that had long been strained by distance and time. One afternoon, Gregory and Michael sat together on the front porch of the house, the sunlight casting long shadows over the yard. The two brothers, once distant and disconnected, now found themselves talking freely, as if they had never been apart. "I've been thinking about what Mom said," Michael said quietly, his voice thoughtful. "I never realized how much I'd become wrapped up in work. She was right, you know. There's so much more to life than winning cases or getting promotions. Gregory nodded slowly. I get that now, too. I've missed so much, Mike. I've been so focused on my career that I've missed out on the things that really matter. Family, time with the people I love. I think Mom wanted us to realize that before it was too late. The silence between them was not uncomfortable but full of understanding. It wasn't easy to admit the shortcomings of their lives, but it was necessary. There was a weight lifted from their shoulders in that moment, a weight they hadn't even known they had been carrying. Clara, too, had begun to shift in ways that surprised even her. She had always believed that her art would be her legacy, that the canvases she painted and the exhibitions she held would be the proof of her success. But Evelyn's letter had opened her eyes to something else. The richness of relationships, the deep connections that had been neglected in her pursuit of fame and recognition. Her mother's words, "I miss the days when you would laugh and tell me about your day," echoed in Clara's mind constantly, and they made her realize how much she had missed out on by focusing solely on her art. For the first time in years, Clara returned to painting for herself, not for accolades or gallery shows. She spent more time with her brothers, enjoying the small moments that had once seemed insignificant. Even as an artist, she found a new perspective in these simple, everyday moments, moments filled with love, laughter, and shared experiences. She would often spend hours with Michael, walking through the town and talking about their mother, about the house, and about the changes they were all making in their lives. One evening, after an afternoon spent painting in the garden, Clara called her brothers into the house. She had something she wanted to show them. As they gathered around the canvas, Clara revealed a new painting, one that depicted the house they had all grown up in, the old house on Maple Lane, bathed in the golden light of dusk. It wasn't a perfect painting. There were rough brushstrokes, some edges blurred, and the details were soft, but it captured something precious. The warmth of home, the nostalgia of childhood, and the love that had been present there, even in the most difficult of times. "This is for Mom," Clara said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "I think she'd have liked it. It's not about the sunsets or the coastlines this time. It's about the place that shaped us, and the people who shaped us." Gregory and Michael stood in silence, taking in the painting. It was a simple piece, but it resonated deeply with them. For so many years, they had focused on the external, the things that could be touched and measured. But Clara's painting was a reminder that the most valuable things in life were often intangible. The love of family, the memories of shared moments, the quiet beauty of everyday life. As the days turned into weeks, the siblings continued to meet at the house, each visit deepening their bond and strengthening their commitment to the lessons their mother had left behind. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension, moments when the old patterns of behavior threatened to resurface. But they had learned something important: the value of presence, the importance of being there for one another, and the power of shared experience. One evening, as the three of them sat around the table in the dining room, the same table where Evelyn had once hosted family dinners, they talked about their mother, about the past, and about their future. There was no rush, no agenda. It was simply a moment of connection, a moment of quiet reflection. "I think Mom knew what we needed all along," Michael said quietly. "She knew we would get so caught up in our own lives that we would forget what really mattered. But she never gave up on us. She kept hoping we would come back." Gregory nodded, his gaze softening. "She never asked for much, did she? Just for us to be present, to be here, to love each other." Clara smiled faintly. "And she taught us how to do that, even when we didn't realize it." They sat there in the soft glow of the evening light, the house around them filled with the quiet hum of life returning to it. They no longer felt the weight of the past as they had before. The house, once a place of sorrow and regret, had become a sanctuary, a place where they could heal and grow together. The air was filled with the promise of new beginnings, not just for the house, but for the three of them. The lessons they had learned from their mother were not things that could be easily put into words or captured in a moment. They were lessons that would unfold over time, lessons that would shape the rest of their lives. But one thing was clear. The inheritance their mother had left them was far greater than anything material. It was the inheritance of love, of presence, and of the understanding that, in the end, it is the people we love and the time we spend with them that make life truly meaningful. As the night deepened and the stars began to twinkle outside the window, the siblings knew that they had started on a new path, one that was guided not by ambition or success, but by the quiet, enduring power of family. And in that moment, they understood that, perhaps for the first time in their lives, they were exactly where they were meant to be. The seasons shifted quietly in Willowbrook, and the Whitlock house on Maple Lane, once filled with echoes of absence, gradually became a place of solace and renewal. Time, it seemed, had slowed, allowing Gregory, Clara, and Michael to linger in the afterglow of the lessons their mother had imparted. The house, with its ivy-covered exterior and creaking wooden floors, no longer felt like a museum of forgotten moments, but rather a living, breathing testament to the strength of family and the resilience of love. Each sibling, in their own way, began to reshape their lives. The subtle changes were not marked by dramatic gestures or headlines, but by small, deliberate choices that spoke of deeper understanding. They found themselves drawn back to the house more and more, not just to sort through belongings or reminisce about the past, but to build new memories that would be carried forward with them. Gregory had, for the first time in years, begun to understand the true meaning of success. It was no longer about climbing the corporate ladder or securing his next big business deal. Instead, he began to measure his days by the moments he shared with his siblings, by the slow mornings spent in quiet conversation, and by the evenings where they gathered around the dinner table, no longer a cold, solitary ritual, but one filled with laughter, stories, and a kind of warmth that Evelyn had once dreamed of. He took steps to downsize his business empire, focusing his energy on mentorship and working more closely with local entrepreneurs who shared his values of collaboration over competition. It was a small shift in direction, but one that brought him a newfound sense of fulfillment. No longer did he define his worth by the number of zeros on a paycheck. Instead, he found joy in the relationships he built, in the quiet acts of kindness that passed between him and the people he now allowed into his life. Gregory was often the one who organized the dinners of the house, a tradition that Evelyn had started but had long abandoned as her children drifted away. He had always been the first to rush back to work, the first to make excuses, but now he took pride in these gatherings. They became a regular part of his life, an unspoken commitment to the legacy his mother had hoped for. Every Sunday, the table would be set again with the same care Evelyn had once given, and though the food was never as elaborate, the company more than made up for it. He began to look forward to these moments with his siblings more than anything else, feeling for the first time that they were living up to the promise his mother had made so many years ago. That family, despite its imperfections, would always be the foundation on which everything else was built. Clara, too, found herself returning to the house more frequently. She began to paint again, but this time not for the purpose of pleasing critics or filling galleries with vibrant images. Her canvas became her place of reflection. She painted the house, the old house on Maple Lane, again and again, capturing it from different angles and in different seasons. The ivy that had once looked like a creeping vine, suffocating the life out of the building, now seemed to bloom in her work, representing the renewed life that had sprung up from years of neglect. But Clara's art was no longer just about capturing beauty. It was about finding peace in the imperfections of life, in the stories woven through the rooms of the house. In the quiet solitude of the attic, she set up an easel and painted the space that had once felt so full of unresolved emotions. She painted the dust, the light streaming through the small window, the worn edges of the furniture that had been left behind for so long. The work was raw, vulnerable, and filled with tenderness, qualities that had always been within her, but had taken years to rediscover. Clara's art, in a way, became a visual diary of her journey back to herself. She no longer sought to be recognized or praised. Instead, she sought a deeper connection to the places and people that had shaped her. The act of painting had become a meditation, an exploration of her emotions, and it was within the walls of the house that she felt most inspired. And as she painted, she also made time for her brothers, taking walks through the neighborhood, cooking meals, and learning once again how to appreciate the simple beauty of shared time. Michael, the youngest of the three, had always been the most introspective. He had carried the weight of responsibility for so long, putting his career first and his personal life second. His mother's letter had shaken him to the core, but it also inspired him to make changes he had long been too afraid to embrace. He was the first to admit that the courtroom had become his battleground, and though he loved his work, it had taken a toll on his personal relationships. For years, he had sacrificed everything in the pursuit of justice. But now, as he walked the same streets his mother had walked, he found himself reconsidering his definition of success. Michael began to focus more on the people who mattered most to him: his family, his friends, and even the neighbors who had been so kind and welcoming during his mother's passing. He found himself offering legal advice to local community groups, helping people who didn't have the resources to hire expensive attorneys. This work, though different from the high-profile cases he had once chased, gave him a sense of satisfaction that he had never experienced before. There was a quiet dignity in helping others, in using his skills for something greater than personal gain. As Michael spent more time with Gregory and Clara, the siblings slowly began to rebuild the deep connection that had once bound them. They took trips together, short visits to nearby towns, or even simple afternoons spent working in the garden of the house. The laughter that had been absent for so long returned to the house, and though they never spoke of it directly, there was an unspoken understanding that this time together was precious. They were no longer the children who had been caught up in their own lives, too busy to care for each other. They were now three adults who had learned the hard way that time, once past, could never be reclaimed. One evening, as they gathered around the dining table for one of their now regular dinners, the conversation turned to the future. They had all made changes, some small and others more significant, but none of them felt as though they had fully understood the extent of their mother's influence until now. "I think she would be proud of us," Clara said, breaking the silence. "Not because we've done anything extraordinary, but because we finally understood what truly matters. Family, time, presence." Gregory nodded in agreement. "I think so too. We've been given a second chance, and I don't want to waste it. This house, Mom's legacy, it's more than just bricks and mortar. It's the foundation of everything we are." Michael smiled, a rare expression of peace settling over him. Maybe it's not too late for any of us to do better. We don't have to be perfect, just present. And I think that's enough. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of their shared understanding settling around them like a warm, familiar blanket. The house, which had once felt like a place of sorrow, now felt like a sanctuary. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into something deeper, something lasting. They had learned to look beyond the surface, to embrace imperfection and the fleeting nature of time. And in doing so, they had begun to heal. As the night wore on, and the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, the three siblings raised their glasses in a quiet toast. Not to the house, not to their achievements, but to the love that had brought them back together. It was a love that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of business and neglect, waiting for them to return. And in that moment, they realized that they had already inherited the greatest treasure their mother could have given them: the ability to love, to forgive, and to cherish the time they had left. They were home. As the weeks stretched into months, the Whitlock family's transformation continued, not in grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but in small, meaningful actions. The house on Maple Lane, a once quiet monument to years of solitude and unspoken regrets, became a gathering place once more. What had once felt like a relic of a lost time was now alive with the vibrancy of shared experiences, the echoes of laughter, and the hum of new beginnings. Each room of the house carried the weight of memories, both painful and joyful, but it was now infused with a new energy, one that resonated from the siblings' renewed bond. The house had been their mother's greatest love, a place she had nurtured and cared for long after the world outside had pulled her children away. As Gregory, Clara, and Michael spent more time together, they found themselves drawn back to the rooms that had shaped their childhood, feeling the deep sense of connection, not just to the house itself, but to the love that had filled it. Gregory, with his newfound understanding of the fleeting nature of time, began to take steps to make the house a place of true sanctuary, not just for himself, but for others as well. He had spent years running his business with an eye always on the future, always pushing for more. But now, with the lessons his mother had imparted to him, he saw the value in slowing down, in being present. And it wasn't just his own life that needed this shift. It was the community he had once ignored in his pursuit of success. He began to transform part of the house into a space for local entrepreneurs and creatives. A large room at the back, once a storage area filled with forgotten boxes, was cleared and refurbished. A long wooden table was placed in the center, with open spaces for meetings, workshops, and gatherings. Gregory reached out to the local community, inviting people who were just starting out, those who, like him, had once felt the isolation of trying to succeed alone. "What good is success?" he had said one evening to his siblings, "if it's not shared?" It was a simple statement, but it carried with it the weight of everything he had learned in the months since their mother's passing. The house, once a symbol of personal loss and solitude, was now a place where people could come together, support one another, and create something lasting. The local business owners who had once kept their distance now found themselves welcomed into the home, where they could exchange ideas and experiences in the very rooms where Gregory had grown up. Clara, too, found new purpose in the house. The act of painting had, for so long, been her escape, her way of finding solace in a world that often felt too chaotic. But now, her art was a reflection of something deeper, a desire to not just capture beauty, but to reflect the changes in her own heart. She painted with intention, pouring her emotions onto the canvas. The paintings that had once depicted distant landscapes, serene coastlines, and abstract forms now took on new meaning. Her latest piece, a large canvas filled with vibrant colors and swirling forms, was inspired by the house itself. It was not an exact replica, but an interpretation of the place that had become a symbol of renewal and understanding. The painting was filled with bursts of color, golden yellows, soft blues, and warm reds that seemed to capture the essence of the house, of the love that had been nurtured there, and of the change that had taken root. "I want people to see this house as more than just an old building," Clara said one day as she unveiled the piece to her brothers. "I want them to feel the energy in it, the way it's been transformed, just like we have." The painting was displayed in the refurbished room at the back of the house, and it became a point of discussion and reflection for everyone who walked through the door. People often stopped to admire it, to ask questions about its meaning, and Clara was more than happy to share the story behind it. But her art wasn't the only way she was healing. Clara began to spend more time with her brothers, reconnecting not just as family, but as friends. The dinners that had once been a rare occurrence were now a weekly tradition, and it was during these meals that they had some of their most heartfelt conversations. They talked about their childhood, about the things they had once shared, and about the paths they had taken in life. There were still moments of tension, of course. No family is without its struggles, but the love that had always been there began to shine through the cracks. And Clara, once so focused on her own dreams, found a new joy in these moments of shared connection. She also started to mentor young artists in the community, teaching them not just about technique, but about the importance of emotional expression through art. She found that helping others discover their voice, much like her own, brought her a sense of fulfillment that no exhibition or gallery could ever offer. Her once solitary pursuit of artistic success had given way to a desire to nurture the creativity in others, to pass on the lessons her mother had taught her, not just about art, but about love and presence. The siblings had come to understand that the time they had together was precious, and they made an effort to spend more of it in each other's company. Michael, once distant and focused only on his career, began to realize that the victories that mattered most in life weren't the ones won in a courtroom. The true victories were the ones found in the everyday moments, time spent together, the simple act of being present for those you love, and making a difference in the lives of others. One day, as the three of them sat in the living room, enjoying the peaceful afternoon, Gregory spoke up. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "about everything we've been doing, and what Mom would have wanted. I think she'd be happy. Not because of any of the things we've accomplished, but because we're finally living the way she always hoped we would. Together, present." Clara and Michael looked at him, their expressions softening as they took in his words. They knew he was right. It wasn't about wealth or success anymore. It was about connection. It was about making the most of the time they had left, and it was about giving back to the world in ways that mattered. "That's what she wanted," Clara said with a gentle smile. "Not for us to be perfect, but to be there for each other, to care, to listen, to make time. All the things we were too busy to do before." Michael nodded, his eyes shining with a newfound understanding. "She always knew we had it in us. And I think, in a way, she gave us the gift of time. The time to do things right." As they sat together in that quiet room, the house around them filled with the soft light of the afternoon, they knew that they were living the life their mother had always dreamed of. The house, once a place of sorrow and regret, had become a symbol of growth and renewal. And the lessons their mother had left them, lessons about love, about presence, and about the importance of time, were the foundation upon which they were now building their futures. The road ahead was still uncertain. Life would continue to present its challenges, its moments of doubt, and its inevitable obstacles. But for the first time in years, the Whitlock siblings faced the future with a deep sense of peace. They knew that no matter where life took them, the love they had for one another and the lessons they had learned would always guide them forward. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its warm glow over the house, the siblings knew they had found their way home, not just to the place on Maple Lane, but to one another, to the love they had almost lost, and to the understanding that no matter how much time had passed, it was never too late to start again. As the years passed, the Whitlock house on Maple Lane became a place of constant evolution. It had transformed from a silent witness to the passage of time into a living testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and presence. Gregory, Clara, and Michael, once disconnected by the demands of their own lives, had found their way back to each other, not just as family, but as individuals who had learned to cherish the most important things in life. The lessons their mother had left them had shaped their paths, guided their actions, and united them in ways they never thought possible. The old house, once filled with echoes of disappointment, was now filled with laughter and shared memories. The meals around the table had become a sacred ritual, the simple act of gathering together a reminder of what truly mattered. The artwork that Clara created, the community projects Gregory initiated, and the legal services Michael offered were no longer mere acts of productivity. They were expressions of love and a desire to give back to the world that had given them so much. One Sunday evening, as the siblings sat around the table for one of their regular dinners, a sense of calm settled over them. They looked at each other, their faces reflecting not just the years that had passed, but the growth they had all undergone. They had been given a second chance, a rare opportunity to rebuild what had been broken, to heal the wounds that time had created. For the first time, they were truly present, not just for one another, but for the world around them. They had learned to give time its due value, to appreciate the fleeting moments, and to understand that success, in all its forms, could never replace the bond of family or the comfort of being there for each other. They had learned that the most meaningful things in life were often the simplest ones. A shared meal, a quiet conversation, a helping hand offered without expectation. As the evening wore on, Michael looked up from his plate, his voice filled with quiet reflection. "I've been thinking about everything we've been through, and I realize now that Mom wasn't just teaching us how to live. She was teaching us how to love. She showed us that love doesn't demand perfection. It just asks for presence." Gregory nodded, a gentle smile playing on his lips. And presence is something we can all give, no matter what our circumstances are. It's the one thing we can always offer each other, no matter where life takes us. Flyra reached across the table, her fingers brushing against her brother's. "I think Mom knew this all along," she said softly. "That life wouldn't always be perfect, but if we were there for each other, if we shared the time we had, that would be enough. And I think she's right." The three of them sat in the quiet comfort of each other's company, the lessons of the past and the promise of the future sitting between them like an unspoken bond. They had come a long way, farther than they could have imagined. And in the process, they had discovered something far more precious than anything material. They had found each other again. The house, now alive with the energy of their shared experiences, stood as a reminder of how far they had come. But it also stood as a symbol of how much more they could still give, how much more they could still learn and share together. For the Whitlock family, the journey wasn't over, it had just begun. In the end, the story of Evelyn Whitlock and her children was not one of regrets or lost time, but one of redemption and the power of second chances. It was a story of how love, once rekindled, could heal the deepest wounds, and how presence, more than anything else, could create a lasting legacy. And as the evening light faded into the night, they knew that they were no longer just living for themselves. They were living for each other. And in that realization, they had found the greatest gift of all, the gift of being truly home. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.